For Stanley Kubrick's second film, he went back to a city and a subject he knew well. The film I'm talking about is Killer's Kiss from 1955, a film noir about a boxer struggling to find his way in New York City. Stanley had previously documented the life of a boxer, Walter Cartier, while he was working for Look magazine as a photographer. He then focused on a day in the life of the same boxer for his second short film, Day of the Fight. It's as if it were a natural career progression to have the protagonist of one of his feature films be a boxer as well. While he doesn't focus on Walter Cartier this time around, you can find direct comparisons to Day of the Fight with some of the shots that appear in Killer's Kiss. Firstly, the opening shot of the boxing posters. And most notably, the shot of both boxers looking at themselves in the mirror before the fight, manipulating their faces to see what they will potentially look like afterwards. There are many similarities to Mr. Kubrick's early work in Killer's Kiss, especially with regards to financing, which again was minimal and independent. Like his previous film Fear and Desire, Stanley worked with his high school friend Howard Sackler on the screenplay, and like Fear and Desire, you don't really feel any emotional connection with the characters on screen. While Fear and Desire was a philosophical look at people's feelings in a given situation, Killer's Kiss is an up-close look at the seedier side of the city of New York. On the strength of Fear and Desire, I was able to raise private financing to make a second feature-length film, Killer's Kiss. And that was a silly story too, but my concern was still in getting experience and simply functioning in the medium, so the content of a story seems secondary to me. I just took the line of least resistance, whatever story came to hand. Both films have story and plot in the background. They were an afterthought, as that quote from Stanley highlights. At this point in his career, he was just trying to get himself noticed for his technical skill as a filmmaker. Killer's Kiss marks the end of an era for Stanley Kubrick. For the rest of his career, he would adapt novels, short stories, and other works. This was his final amateurish piece, as he would put it. Welcome to the Films of Stanley Kubrick.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
As I mentioned previously, Killer's Kiss was once again a small-budget film, which Stanley Kubrick funded himself along with the help of family, friends, and a Bronx business owner by the name of Maurice Purcell. Money was so tight, in fact, that Mr. Kubrick was on welfare during the production and would have to shut down early on Fridays to go and collect his check. Some other returning names to this production that worked on his previous film are Frank Silvera, who played Mac in Fear and Desire. This time around he plays the antagonist Rapallo. Gerald Fried, who did the music for Fear and Desire and for Stanley's early short film Day of the Fight. And Stanley's wife, but it wasn't the same one as Fear and Desire. This time it was his second wife, Ruth Sobotka, who was a professional dancer and performs the beautiful yet haunting ballet sequence midway through the film.
By the time she was 20, she was dancing with the Ballet Russe, and Daddy was so proud of her.
One final thing to return were Stanley's feelings towards the film. He famously hated Fear and Desire, and unfortunately he wasn't a fan of Killer's Kiss either. In my opinion, it's a very amateurish piece. The subject was atrociously bad and it was badly developed, but still, it allowed me to get some attention. Even though he did feel this way about the film, he did manage to sell it to United Artists. They would go on to help fund the production costs at the back end of Killer's Kiss. The reason this film went over budget was actually similar to Fear and Desire. Stanley added the sound to the film during editing. Now, this wasn't for the same reason as Fear and Desire. It wasn't an error in judgment. Stanley actually hired someone to record the sound on set, but the boom mic kept leaving shadows in the scenes, so knowing he could add the audio afterwards, he fired him. This didn't go according to plan, however, as it would take 4 months to add the sound to the film. Also, Irene Kane wasn't available to record her lines, so Gloria's voice in the film is actually that of another actress, Peggy Loban.
I really am in a hurry.
United Artists also offered Mr. Kubrick $100,000 to make his next film, The Killing. And this is sadly where United Artists' true intentions were. They saw Stanley's potential, but weren't particularly interested in Killer's Kiss. It would end up being a second feature when it was released and wouldn't get top billing anywhere. This still happens to this day. On the Blu-ray releases by both Criterion and Arrow Video, they have it as an extra feature on their respective versions of The Killing. Regardless of United Artists and Mr. Kubrick's feelings towards Killer's Kiss at the time, the film still holds up well to this day. At the very least, it's a great snapshot of New York City at the time, with its dirty, run-down backstreets and feeling of desperation wherever you look. We really do get a sense of place and time. The streets in Killer's Kiss appear so dirty and grimy, you almost feel like you need to take a bath after watching it.
Come on with the rain, I've a smile on my face.
Killer's Kiss starts like all good noir films do, at the end. We join our hero, the boxer Davy Gordon, played by Jamie Smith, as he waits impatiently in a train station. Of course, we don't know why he's there, but worry not, Stanley will use a storytelling device which he will use often during his career, voiceover narration.
I could never stand to see anyone like that, whatever his age might be, but more especially when he was real old like this one was.
Davy talks us through his thought process as he himself tries to make sense of what has happened over the past couple of days.
Maybe it begins by taking life too serious. Anyway, I think that's the way it began for me.
From the station, we get taken back in time a few days to Davy's bedsit, as we would call it here in the UK, a small room which he lives in by himself. Stanley cleverly uses a pivoting camera movement from a fixed position in the centre of the room to give us a full 360 look at how small the apartment is as Davy paces around trying to prepare himself for his upcoming fight. As he walks around his prison cell-like accommodation, he steals a look at the woman who lives across from him, Gloria Price, played by Irene Kane in one of her very few acting roles. At this point we switch to her point of view as she also steals a glance at Davy while he's not looking. From here on, Stanley uses some inspired editing to show us the similarities between Davy and Gloria's life that go beyond casual voyeurism. They both leave their apartment, meet outside where they exchange a quick hello and go on with their day. Here we first meet Vinnie Rapallo, Gloria's boss, who shows us early on just how jealous he gets when he sees her with other men.
You're doing all right for yourself.
What do you mean? Oh, he just lives in the building.
Vinnie owns a dance hall where Gloria works as a taxi dancer. She's paid to dance with other people. The dance hall, with its nearby dark and dirty back alleys, illustrate how thin the veneer of glamour can be in a place like New York, even on Broadway where the hall is situated. Davy is a boxer nearing the end of his career, and he's going to make one last go of it with fight number 100. The fight itself is one of the best boxing matches put to film, especially for the time. It is so visceral, almost panic-inducing even, which is what Davy more than likely feels as his career slips from his hands. Pure panic as he gets knocked out for the final time. As crowded as the auditorium sounds and feels, it was practically empty when Stanley shot the scene. It's the use of clever shots, close-ups and upward angles that mask the fact that not many people were there. For most of the scene, we're actually in the front row of the audience, which gives the whole sequence the feeling of a documentary, a shooting style Stanley Kubrick was familiar with from his short films. He implements it very effectively here. It's only when the big punches land that Stanley moves to the first person to let us feel the weight of them. It's after this loss, his final loss, and while speaking to his uncle on the phone, that Davy decides to move back to Seattle to work on his uncle's ranch. While trying to sleep off this final loss, Davy has a frantic dream that can be quite easily compared to the interdimensional travel sequence from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I feel this may be a coincidence, however, as it was one of the effects team that came up with the sequence in 2001. Davy gets awoken with a start as he hears Gloria screaming as she is attacked by her boss, Rapallo. He rushes to her apartment to save her, but Vinnie escapes. Davy comforts Gloria and stays with her for a while to make sure she's okay. It's while they are having breakfast in the morning that Gloria explains her tragic backstory and the reason she is working as she does as a dancer for hire, that the two fall in love and decide to escape New York City together before it corrupts them for good. This isn't one of the film's great love stories, far from it, but it does feel real. You can tell they are both desperate and just want to get away from their lives. You could say it's more of a relationship of convenience than anything. After the two decide they are leaving together, a lot of the film is actually shot on locations around New York City, for which Stanley didn't have permits and had to resort to guerrilla filmmaking, a skill he more than likely honed while he worked as a street photographer. Although a film camera is a lot harder to hide than a stills camera, he does it very well, because you don't really notice any of the pedestrians looking directly into the camera wondering what is going on. Mr. Kubrick's eye for location and framing is again shown to be on a level that very few other directors are on, with shots like the staircase up to Rapallo's club and its foreboding warning sign, to the entire ballet sequence performed by his wife Ruth Sobotka, to the alleyway where Davy's fight promoter Albert meets his unfortunate demise being backlit, casting Albert and his killers in deep silhouette. This incident is what leads to the final showdown in the mannequin factory at the film's climax. But before we get to that, I just want to mention the chase sequence leading to it. Firstly, it starts off with Davy being captured by Rapallo and his goons as the result of a blink and you'll miss it beatdown. It happens so quickly, but it's one of the most brutal takedowns I've ever seen in a film. Davy manages to escape the situation, however, due to the power of his magic socks. They propel him through a window to safety. I'm obviously joking here, but Davy's socks do have some sort of ability because they change from white to black in a matter of seconds. This is in fact the only continuity error that Stanley Kubrick was ever aware of in any of his films. The chase across the rooftops that happens shortly after this is quite something for its time. You can tell Stanley just had to go with whichever shots he could get because he more than likely didn't have a permit to be filming up there either. This is highlighted by the fact that Frank Silvera accidentally falls over while giving chase, but this is the take that is used in the film. Finally trapped, Davy and Vinny have to fight to the death in the now iconic mannequin factory scene. This 5-minute sequence took 2 weeks and $15,000 to film. The cost is mainly down to how many mannequins were damaged or destroyed in the battle, which sees limbs and body parts being thrown all over the place. I'm unsure if the weapons used in the fight are stage props or the real thing, but the way the two actors are stumbling around and visibly pulling their punches, as it were, it would lead me to believe that they might actually be real. Especially if you watch the way Frank Silvera decimates one of the mannequins with the axe. And if that is the case, there are some extremely close calls when it comes to potential onset injuries. The scene actually feels very similar to one from another Stanley Kubrick film, which we'll be looking at in a few videos' time, Spartacus. As much as we've explored Killer's Kiss, I've only really skimmed over the events that happen in the film. It feels like we've talked about a lot, but Killer's Kiss is a strange beast. The runtime is only slightly longer than Fear and Desire at 67 minutes, yet it feels like a film with a much longer duration, and not in a bad way. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Killer's Kiss marks the end of an era for Stanley Kubrick. No more amateurish, low-budget productions from now on, because shortly after finishing this film, he would meet James B. Harris through an old acquaintance. James and Stanley would agree to a 3-picture partnership. James would put up the money, and Stanley would make the films. The 3 pictures they made together are Lolita, Paths of Glory, and the subject of my next video, The Killing from 1956. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at Killer's Kiss, and I'd love it if you continued the journey through Stanley Kubrick's filmography with me. Sadly, there are only 11 films left. However, the saying quality over quantity has never been more apt than when talking about the films of Stanley Kubrick. Thank you very much for watching, keep exploring films for yourself, and I'll see you on the next one.